Welcome, everyone. We've got some participants joining us, so we will give it a few minutes as people are rolling in. Right, people coming in. More minute. How are y'all doing today, Dr. J, Adar?
Doing well, Tiffany. Thanks for having us again. It's great to be here.
Yeah, super excited for this discussion. Usually when Jay and I get together, we can't stop talking. So
I'll do my best to rein you in. But it looks like we've got a good number of people entered. So hi, everyone. Welcome to our session today, AI in Leadership, Q&A with our experts here. My name is Tiffany. I'll be moderating today's session. Our speakers today have experience in their fields and are, as they said, so excited to share their insights. So I will just go ahead and let you both introduce yourself. Dr. J.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jay Pugh. I'm our head of leadership and development with Educate 360. And once again, thanks for having me.
And Adar.
hey, my name is Adar Garg. I am the managing director of AI here at E360. So I cover everything we do internally as it relates to AI, the tools that we use, as well as the courses that we offer around AI. And yeah, super excited to be here.
Cool. Well, thank you both for joining us, and thank you to everyone out there for joining us. This is going to be a very interactive session, so please make note of the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Ask questions. We will try and answer them in real time, but we'll also leave some time at the end of the session for Q&A, and this session will also be recorded and will be sent to you afterwards. So no need to furiously take notes. You'll have access to the recording. And to kick us off, first I want to learn a little bit about where everyone is in their adoption journey. So if you want to take a second to see, thumbs up if you see that poll on there. Great. Some answers are coming in. So Adar, while we're getting those answers, can you give us a little bit of a overview of what the adoption or what the AI landscape looks like these days?
Yeah, so I think that we've gone from a world where it's this new technology that people haven't played around with, haven't touched, to a world where a lot of people are trying it out. They're in kind of the experimentation stage. So McKinsey puts the number at 75% of organizations are actively experimenting with AI. In my experience, I think that McKinsey tends to skew a little bit larger organization. As I talk to companies that are more in the mid-market and SMB, I would say that that number of like folks that are just getting started with the experimentation is a little bit larger. But everyone is seeing that like this is the future. We need to start to play around with it. We need to start to get comfortable with it. Then, as we start to look at organizations that are going further than experimentation, Deloitte puts the number at about 1/3 of the use cases that are in experimentation are actually going to come out like they're on path to making it to production. And Accenture says that about 36% of organizations have scaled some generative AI solutions, right? So again, these organizations tend to look at the larger companies in our economy. So I would expect that mid-market and small and medium business are kind of going down that path, but trailing maybe 6 to 12 months behind.
Well, it seems like based on our polls, that's right where we are. A lot of people experimenting, scaling up, but people just getting started too, and that's great. That's why we're here to help you get started. And Jay, as people are getting started, what do you think is most important in addition to just the software in actually kicking these things off and making them work?
Tiffany, I think this is a really cool time to really be in the workforce. I am a giant nerd myself. For those that have been on webinars already, I am a giant nerd. I love the technology side of things. And I think that when it comes to AI, there's so much out there to play with, to be able to use. And I think that's important to be able to do so. But from a leadership perspective, I don't know that it's just about having the tools. I think it's one thing to have tools, But if you can't align the people behind it, or you can't build a process on how it's actually going to be fully implemented, or if we're not really using on how we can scale that tech, that's why the scaling up is really important. Then what happens is that everybody's using AI in such a different way. And from Adar's perspective, I'd love to hear, is that going to mess with the way that the outputs are going to come back and provide feedback? But from our end, what we see is that it's going to create a lot more chaos and confusion if people don't know how their role works with AI and what the rollout of that looks like. I think it can create an unnecessary fear if that communication is there. So as a whole, Tiffany, my biggest advice is that I think we got to kind of slow down to speed up. I think we need to get ourselves to a point of like looking at this from how are our people really going to be affected by this? What processes and governances do we really need to make sure are in place? And how do we really make sure that what we're doing is actually going to create a larger scale impact for implementation? And so I think the leaders need to champion the change, but they need to do it not in a way that we've seen some companies do it, to where it's like, no, we're just going to replace it and go from there, and that we're just going to create efficiency. Okay, but what does that look like? So I kind of want to hear from Adar on that end, because that's kind of what I'm seeing from our side of the business. I'd like to see what's happening from your mind.
Yeah. So, I think that there are multiple approaches that are being tried out in the market, right? So some people are saying, let me just empower my employees with the tools, right? And often these folks are saying, let's get started with Copilot. Let's get started with like the enterprise version of ChatGPT, and let's just let people use these tools, right? Now, in that, enablement is key, because, okay, this tool starts to appear in your Teams views, and in your Microsoft Word and Microsoft Outlook views. And until you know how to properly use that tool in your daily workflow, it's just kind of there, right? You might see a colleague using it in an innovative way, and you're like, oh, I should do that, right? And you start to kind of adopt it. But it happens really organically, and that organic change is slow, because people kind of have their workflows in mind, right? So we see a lot of interest in helping teams get started with Copilot, start to master the particular applications that they use in Copilot, with prompt engineering type things as it relates to ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and those types of tools. So there's enablement involved there, but that feels a little bit more of a laissez-faire, like free market type approach to like, let me just give people the tool and let them figure out, the things that are redundant or just like not a good use of their time, just requirements of the job that they can offload to the AI. And
what I like,
organizations kind of, like meeting summaries. So I'll go talk to organizations that have taken that path without enablement, and it'll be like, oh yeah, like 80% of our people use Copilot. We can see it in the usage statistics. And I'm like, okay, and how many of those people are going beyond summarizing a meeting, right? And they're like, oh, maybe like 5 or 10%.
right.
And so that's where those extra use cases start to come into play as it relates to that enablement. But you need to know what those use cases are that justify the investment, right? So like, I attend a lot of meetings. Meeting summaries are helpful for me if my organization can put that together as, the business case to justify the investment. Fantastic. The meeting summaries bought the software, and now you can use it for anything else you want to go to. Then
I'm
there's
going
the
to jump
top-down.
in right there and
Oh,
say,
sorry.
like, I'm interested to hear in the chat of people who are getting started or who are experimenting or scaling up. What are you using it for right now? Because that might also help us guide the conversation. So if you want to just drop in the chat, how are you currently using it? Is it independent? Is your organization adopting apps or, different enablement tools? So definitely drop it in there and let us know. And then, Adar, I think that both you and Dr. J talked about, okay, you can get a shiny new tool, and how you implement it is the most important thing, right? Because technology without process is just chaos. And we've all been there. Oh, chat is disabled. My bad. Let me make sure that I get that. And while we're doing that.
And as you're doing that, Tiffany, one thing that might be helpful for me to know once we kind of get the information is, I think Adar brings up a really great point of, is the change and is the approach, is it coming more from a top-down approach, or is it more of a bottom-up free market approach in the way that it's being used? I think it would be really good to hear from the group, or the people here in this chat. I'd love to hear from you all is, how are you finding your companies implementing it? Is it something coming from the top down as far as what needs to be done? Or is it really more of sort of free market, go and see what's out there, go play, go do this, go make it happen and see where that is? I think that would be really cool to hear from some members of our people that are here.
And it should be enabled now. So yeah, there we go, a bit of both. Great. And as we're seeing these roll in, I also wanted to address that a lot of companies are scaling back because of failed execution. And so, what does good execution look like? And Adar, you mentioned an AI use case. What is that, and who needs it, and what does that look like? How do you create an AI use case and say, this is what we're using it for?
So it's interesting to see the comments come in. It seems like we have a good mix of
We do have a mix
going on, right? Which is fascinating. So here's the journey that I tend to see at organizations, right? People will start off with someone in the C-suite being like, "Oh my God, did you play around with ChatGPT? Like I finally got to it over the weekend, and this could change everything in our lives, right?" So that's a discussion that starts off somewhere in the C-suite. Eventually people are like, well, we need to be careful about where and how we deploy this thing. And data and security and privacy and all of these concerns start to crop up, right? So then you start to think about, well, what are we actually going to do with the AI, right? And because that then starts to narrow all of the risks that we need to think about as we think about this new technology. And in some cases, the use cases are just it's within a particular application. So let's say it is meeting minutes. So if you're a sales organization, getting those meeting minutes, having them be accurate, having them be put into CRM effectively, having all of that intelligence now at the fingertip of your sellers, right? That's something that is highly appealing to every sales leader I know, including ours here at Educate 360. Right? And so there are solutions for that. So Copilot for Sales, for example, is one that connects Dynamics and all of your Dataverse in the Microsoft environment. But in doing that, we've kind of narrowed the scope, right? We've said, okay, there's this technology, it can do everything, down to I want to make sure that my salespeople can more effectively and more efficiently follow up, have notes, right? Share those notes with the rest of the company through the CRM, and be able to become more analytic with how they approach their markets, their clients, right? That's something that then we can start to model around okay, well, if our salespeople become more efficient, then these are the dynamics that we can expect to see in our marketing funnel, right? The benefit of that investment is X to the top line or the bottom line. And that's what ultimately drives the decision of okay, let's invest in the tool. Let's make sure that all of our salespeople have access to the tool. So it's not just about the technology, it's about the thought process of there's this technology, it's capable of doing all of these things, right? What are the things that I needed to do in my organization in order to realize that benefit and that value? Then you start to look at the technology side and say, are there tools and products out there that solve this problem for me? Or are these things that I need to build in a custom way, in a bespoke way, right? To go solve that. That tells you the investment that's required. You have a sense of the return that you could get from solving that problem, and where the ROI is sufficient for your CFO, you go forward with the process.
Well, and it's interesting, Adar, because you're looking at it very much from a top-down, leadership makes a decision about a business. And what we're seeing in the chat, and Jay, I want you to talk about is, we're seeing a lot of people saying, I'm learning it, there's no management support.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, Jay, can you talk to maybe two sides of the coin? One is, how can people who are seeing the value get stakeholder buy-in? And alternatively, how can leaders communicate to teams how to do this?
Yeah, Tiffany, I think this is a really key point, especially looking at this chat, is that a lot of many of the people that I'm seeing in the chat, they're saying that they are going out on the adventure and finding it. And I think that if we're talking about stakeholder buy-in, I think there's a few different ways that we have to promote this message upward to leadership. I think number one, we have to demonstrate, Adar uses a really great word, which is, or phrase, which is ROI, right? How are we really demonstrating that there's an ROI behind what we're using? Being able to demonstrate cases to say, here's how much time we've saved by building marketing collateral for this, or here's the X amount of time that was used here previously in generation of data that now we have over here that now we can use for creativity. I think if you can tie numbers, and this is for everybody that's in the chat that's saying, well, if I'm trying to get buy-in from my leader that we need to be using this, the biggest thing is start tying the analytics and the numbers for how much time has been saved. Because at the end of the day, time really is money. And in that case, if we are doing that, we are showing a little bit more of that use case, as Adar is mentioning, to say, I don't know if we've realized this, but our team has saved 15 hours this month by being able to exercise this as a platform rather than being able to generate all of this information for, say, for instance, marketing collateral or for operational processes or things like that that can be able to make life easier. The other piece that comes into play from a top-down perspective, I really do think it comes down to trust. I think the fact is that anything that comes from the top, we want to have a belief system behind it. I think we want to see that there's something great behind this, but I think there is a stigma at the moment with AI that AI is potentially replacing roles, jobs, functions, whatever that is. I think one of the key components, and we've seen some instances in the news where this has happened, to where the messaging is a really important thing from the top. That I think messaging needs to not be that it's not a replacement, but it is really more as a supplement to allow you to be more creative in your position. That's sort of the biggest thing in talking with other leaders in the Fortune spaces and really trying to look at this is, many of them are saying we're not doing this to try to eradicate roles. We're trying to do this to free up the administrative side of things so that you can have room to create, build, and be more efficient in those approaches.
So Jay, I think that's fascinating, right? Because to me, the time saved approach is it's only half of that story
Right.
that we're trying to tell, right? The other half of that story is, well, what did you do with that time? Right? So like, did that time become your time? Did that time become extra productivity? Right? So like if an RFI used to take you 20 hours to go respond to, and now you can respond to it in 5 hours, let's say, are we doing 4x the RFI responses, right? Or is our top of funnel growing? Okay. Are we following all the way through to like close deals? Right? And no, well, we can't handle, the next stage in the funnel now. Okay, so then let's scale up that side of the funnel, right? So like the time savings is interesting, but it leads us down the fear of like, oh, well, like if the AI can do half my job, then like,
What other metrics are we bringing in? I think that's where the
whereas
other
if we
side of the
can,
leadership side comes in, Adar, is that from the leader side, they need to make sure that there are new metrics and movements in the way that that happens, right? So for instance, I've, two directors on my team. And if my team was spending X amount of time doing so much content development, well, in this case, now if content development, because facilitator notes are moving so much faster, where is that time being directed that's generating that output in that ROI? And that's got to be on the leader. That's got to be on the leaders in our space to say, hey, we need to see how we're really generating better revenue or generating better output based on this time saved. So I fully do agree with that. I think the other part of the role of the leader, which is kind of the part two of this with this ethos that comes into this, is that leaders have to be more facilitative. I think if leaders are just pushing down directive and saying, well, now you need to use this, and this is how you're going to use it, and this is going to be what you're going to do, once again, you're going to find more resistance in this case. And I think you have to really empower your teams that it's okay to say these are the overarching metrics that we're trying to achieve by creating this better output. But if we're not putting the empowerment on them to showcase how A, time's being saved here, and B, what outputs are being approved or what are improved, then what's happening is that people aren't feeling like they have stake in the game. And I think that's ultimately an underlying fear, is that people want to have stake in the game when they're doing this.
And,
thing I
that's
wanna,
why I think that the bottoms up has to ultimately become a top down thing, right?
Yeah.
Because like if you're just using the technology on a bottoms up basis, the organization isn't going to be able to realize that value, because it's just going to stay like a pocket of excellence here, a pocket of excellence there, right? When you get that top down approach and people start to realize, oh wow, if I scale that pocket of excellence across the organization, that means, you know, percentages of annual growth to our top line. That means percentages more coming to the bottom line, right? And like these are significant numbers when you start to apply the technology in a way that fits with you, but it has to be tailored to you, right? That's where the people and the processes side of things come in.
I would love to know where a lot of people in this chat, like what their role is, if it's more of like a project management type of role, or is it more of like, maybe it's a business analysis role, or maybe it's a tech role or an implementation role or whatever that is. And the reason why is because if the people in this chat are not necessarily in senior leadership, one of the questions I always get is, well, how can I accelerate and move and go? I'm already seeing things come in, which is really awesome. And so I say this, I'm seeing some project management components, seeing some program leadership. That's phenomenal. And I ask this question because I always get the question of, how can I move up in my role? This is how you move up in your role, is by being able to be a pioneer and create some sort of, whether it's a reduction of cost based on X that's going to help your company, or an increase of revenue in Y. That's how a lot of people that I know, and not trying to say I'm one of the younger guys on the market, but that's kind of where it is. But how people move up earlier is by being the pioneer in that case. So being able to adopt this and see how it generates revenue and being able to build that use case, I think really makes a big difference.
I love all of that. And I think that showing how you're using it effectively is how you get widespread adoption, is how you get leadership buy-in, is how you get, your colleague to be like, hey, how'd you do that so fast? Oh, let me show you something. And so that starts to move the needle a little bit. And in thinking about that, one of the things I want to talk about is how to get people to use things correctly. Adar, you shared a situation with me where you were talking to some organization and they had just adopted a huge AI database, and you could search for different files and people were using it to find compensation records for their bosses, right? And so they weren't using it the right way. And so that's where we kind of get into the ethical usage and the sensitivity of data. So how can we talk about getting people to use it the right way, correctly, ethically, and as well as, efficiently?
Yeah, so I mean, there are many layers to that onion, Tiffany, right? Like the first is like it has to be implemented properly. So in that organization that I told you about, right? Like the the team had been kind of putting a whole bunch of files into shared repositories that they hadn't been careful about role-based access to that content, right? Now, these files were stored so deep in the repository that like no one reasonably like dug around in the tree folder and found it. And if they did, they knew that they were being illicit about it and like didn't tell anybody, right? Well, as soon as this team turned on Copilot, your Copilot, by the way, has access to everything you do in SharePoint, everything you do in the Microsoft Dataverse, right? Now that information was readily available to people's Copilots. And so, including some of this confidential HR data. So before that organization turned on Copilot, they should have made sure that all of the roles and access controls around the particularly sensitive data or confidential data, the data that you don't want to have the whole organization have access to, right? You got to make sure that that stuff is protected. Sometimes that involves doing some sort of a security audit. Sometimes that involves training for the people that administer your SharePoint sites. But you've got to wrap your arms around the data element of it first, right? Because then the AI is trying to answer based on those things. Next step
it's
is
just when you think about AI, you think, oh, I'm just going to install this thing, and it's not just the thing; it's the data, the security, the leadership. So very interesting. But continue.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. You know, AI builds on top of all of the things that we've done as an industry up to this point. So it builds on top of the cloud. It builds on top of data platforms. It builds on top of, you know, as we grow compute and data, we also grow attack surfaces from a cybersecurity perspective. So we have to be extra careful around all of those things. And then, like, you know, different solutions do different things with your data, right? So like some tools will say, hey, like if you use my tool, please go forth, especially the free version, please use it, right? Because every time you use it, the data of your usage becomes my data, right? Other tools say, nope, I don't, like I give you the permissions to turn that off. I give you the permissions to, you know, if you buy my subscription, then your data remains your data. I don't train on that data, right? So like you have to be really careful about which tool you end up using. And that's where, you know, the role of the technology organization is critical to both secure the data, understand what data is, you know, needs to be secured at what level, and make sure that those policies are in place. And then to choose the right tools that fit with your kind of corporate guidelines from a security and an adoption perspective. So that, you know, that's just kind of the first layer of the onion, is to just make sure that you've got your data protections in place, you've got the right security provisions in place, right? Then you start to get into educating everyone who's going to use that AI on where the AI is good, where the AI is not as good, or how you can progressively get the AI to be better. So I'll give an example. I had to write a report that was based on a whole bunch of data, right? So at first I tried to have the AI draft the first draft of my report in just a straight shot, right? So I kind of submitted the problem and the AI came back with a response. That response was super bland. It was like kind of the average of the internet, if you will, right? I had to work with it in successive prompts to get its reasoning process kind of in the right direction. And then I had to generate the report, and it was a much better output, right? So there was some learning in that of like, what can I trust the AI to do? How do I look at the outputs of each of those interim steps and quality check them the way that I would quality check the work of an intern or a junior resource, right? And that helps me build trust and also still kind of have my hands in the craft of generating that report. I'm almost using the AI in that instance as a junior resource that I don't have on my team, right? So it lets me scale. But it requires kind of having all of that human decision making, going in and checking every source that is in that report to make sure that it's a legitimate source, right? And that the quote is being used appropriately and some of those things. There have been some public displays from let's just say leaders that should know better, of you know, using generated output from AI without cross-checking it, without doing the appropriate kind of due diligence on the outputs, right? So we need to make sure that people understand how these tools work, how to best leverage them, and then how to develop trust in them, right? Otherwise, we run the risk of either taking opportunities to, like, in a proposal, I need to stand out as a differentiated offering to my client. If I come in with something that's kind of the average of the internet, that doesn't, like, yeah, sure, I submitted a proposal, but my chances of winning or at least getting from that written response to a conversation are slim, right? Because I just submitted the average of the internet. Instead, if I work with it to develop an answer that reflects my values, that reflects my differentiation, but it ultimately also extends the power of the AI to, ingest the internet and find the details that support my overall thesis. That's one way that I use it personally to advance my thinking as opposed to just, getting the proposal done in 15 minutes instead of 5 hours and having 4.5 hours to do other things.
Yeah, and I think you gave us a lot on the data side, the security side, how to use it, but then sort of segueing into the human side, and how do we remain authentic and different and unique and not the average of the internet. And I think Kelly said that she used it to help message in teams that was more professional, right? So using it to help, but also understanding your behavior, its behavior. So Jay, talk to us a little bit more about the human side of AI adoption. And
Yeah, I think if I may, we have somebody in our chat that mentions that data security is a big topic that the average user misses and then sort of leadership shudders at. And so, are you just going out to the web and grabbing something? Are you sharing information that shouldn't be shared? So I think that there's a few pieces that we really have to look at. And to me, one of the key words from a human element that we have to be mindful of is awareness. I think we have to be aware of the sources, as Adar was talking about, being aware of the sources being provided. I also think we need to be aware that we're not losing our own authenticity in what's being delivered. And I say that because and I'd love to see just by a thumbs up in the chat or a hand raise or something like that. How many of you have seen something that has come across your desk, whether it's an email or a message or a summary, and 100% it's AI and there's not any sort of human dialogue behind it? I'm really curious on that to see how many of you have had that come across your desk and be like, wow, AI definitely did all that work for you there. It's starting to come in right away. And so I say that because AI daily, right? And this is to me, and once again, I'm a firm advocate, nerd, loving the AI push. But I think this is where you might have a little bit of a slippery slope that if you're not aware, if you're not if you're not aware of the data and how you're using it, if you're not holding yourself accountable to making your voice come out of it. I think that's one of the biggest things, is that one of the huge things from a human element is that we have a voice as humans. And so we need to make sure that whatever final output we're really driving, we really want to make sure that our voice is coming into play. And I'll give a good example of meeting summaries, right? I'm getting meeting summaries and I'm getting 48-line meeting summaries. Well, as the great GIF as we've seen many times over and over again, ain't nobody got time for that. We don't have time to be able to look through 48 lines of AI and what has come in with this. So we're being able to, I don't want to use the term lazy, but it's almost holding ourselves accountable to saying, what are the real need to knows that we need to drive this with, knowing our organization, knowing our stakeholders, knowing the people that we're communicating with. I think the biggest piece in we're talking about human is to make sure that you as the human are also checking into things, making sure you're the one doing the right sort of checkpoints and making sure that that's coming in. I could easily produce things. And Rinku, if I may, I'm a huge fan of what was just said in the chat, which is nothing beats a heart-centered response. And it has to come from your heart, your style, your approach. And while, yes, AI can be able to catch up and kind of focus on sort of your style, your personality, if you will, you want to make sure that your authentic voice always comes out of anything. And that to me is one of the components that can't be lost. The other piece that ties into the ethical side, as we're talking from a human perspective, is education. I think that while it is so great to have a free market, I'm a firm advocate that the more that you can learn things in a way of knowing what is right and wrong with it and knowing what is true good practice, the better that we have. And I think if we didn't, that's why Adar, we offer trainings in our space, right? I think for us, it's our ability to be able to educate people on, I don't want to use the term the right way to do it, but really the way that is best practice. I think having best practice is a huge component on ensuring that we're doing things diligently, that we're communicating things clearly, that we're implementing things with true diligence, I think, is a huge component. I think it allows for more transparency. And Dominic, great point here is to where when we're talking about it should be used to enhance where your thoughts are coming in. It may take us 10 minutes to come to a true thought. So let AI scale that back for you and make that easier, but still put your stamp on what needs to come out of it. And I think that to me is one of the most ethical things because only according to the Association of Talent Development, while maybe 96% of senior leaders at Fortune 500s are implementing governance, only 31% are actually requiring training. And that to me is an astounding differentiation in number that is a little bit fearful for me. And so that's why being able to take courses on AI, but also take courses on transformation, taking course on change management, taking courses on process improvement, being able to know what those things are is going to be really critical in not just implementing automation, but being able to drive into a real meaningful practice of using AI.
A lot of
And
people ask me, what's going to be left for the humans to do if the AI can do all of these tasks that I spend my day doing, right? And my common response to that is, well, we're going to be humans, right? Like, so if the technology takes, like, especially when I was earlier in my career, like 80% of my job felt like it was something that a robot could do, right? Properly trained. And as an AI and automation person, that particularly drove me nuts, right? Today, a lot of that could be done with AI. Tomorrow, even more of that will be possible to be done with AI. But what won't be done with AI is the relationship building, right? What won't be done with AI is now like having the empathy to understand what my colleague is struggling with and being able to turn that into a solution that helps my colleague struggle less, that then allows them to scale more and bigger, right? So those classic things that like we learn on the playground are going to become increasingly important of like teamwork, empathy, kindness, right? But
Emotional intelligence.
emotional, yeah.
Yeah. Rinku
and what I'm
mentions about client pain point. Diagnosis of real personal issues is a huge component. And Tiffany,
what I'm
I'm sorry,
hearing
I didn't want to interrupt. Please.
No, what I'm hearing nonstop is, we just published, Educate 360 just published a white paper about the 3 pillars of success, and it's people, process, and technology. This is not a new theory. It's been around forever. But in this instance, you need the technology, you need the cloud, you need the security, you need the data, you need the process to figure out, okay, how are we using this? Who's doing what should we be doing? What shouldn't we be doing? And then you need the people, you need the communication, you need the empathy, you need those soft skills. So it really is a combination of all 3. I did want to, as we're winding down a little bit, one, ask another poll what the greatest barriers are to adoption, because I think we saw in our original poll that there's pockets of excellence, right? We're trying things out, we're experimenting, but we're not scaling dramatically. So what are some of those challenges? And then I think Adar and Jay, you can speak to those challenges, and also any other questions that you guys have, please drop them in the chat. Very interested in learning more about what you're interested in. So I'm seeing a lack of understanding, resistance to change, data and privacy concerns, integration with existing systems. Give it a couple more seconds to populate, and while we do that, so what resistance to change, Jay? How do you overcome resistance to change? What are the best practices?
Well, I don't know too many people that just absolutely love change so much. So no, I think the biggest thing with change is that when we're talking about resistance to change, being able to know how you personally work through change is an important thing. And I say that because many of us, we have psychological barriers to change, and they're all different. For some people, it's more of a it's fear driven. For others, it's more of hesitancy, meaning like I don't know what to do about implementing X. So we have to understand what is the root of our fear of change here. I think being able to identify that's going to be a really important thing. And we teach that in a course called Building Resilience for Change. That's a huge piece, is identifying your own personal barrier to change. I think
And
the other thing that comes into play is from an organizational standpoint, one of the biggest fears that happen is that you have 18 different departments using AI 18 different ways, and now all of a sudden there's chaos amongst the organization. So really gaining true clarity and transparency in the way that the organization plans on using this is going to ease a little bit of that barrier to change, because there's a lot more clarity and direction. So those are two things that I would really recommend first and foremost, is knowing your personal barrier to change, and then knowing how you can align cross-departmentally in the way that we can use and implement this.
And I want to toss it over to Adar for some of the other barriers, lack of understanding, integrating with existing systems, data privacy, security control. I would like to, in the chat, what do you think the lack of understanding is? Is it the understanding of the tools itself, or the understanding of how to use it? Because Adar, what I heard from you is create a use case, and that's really important. And so, explain, like we're kindergarteners, how you would start at a company level to create a use case to say, we need to use AI, and this is how we need to use it, how it integrates with systems, how we can overcome those concerns.
I mean, so, and we do workshops around this regularly for clients, right, to help them through this process. So first of all, you're not alone in trying to define your use case, identify your use case, document it. There is help out there. But the general approach that we follow is to say, okay, let's focus on a particular user and a particular process that that user is going through, right? So right off the bat, we got the people and we got the process, right? Let's take technology as like we're in the magic wand moment, right? Like, let's pretend that we can do anything we need to with the technology. What process would we fix? And who would be affected by that? And like, what do they want to see in this fixed process? Right. So I went through this in the public sector with a client recently. And we were talking about so we were with the department leaders of this public sector entity. And we started to talk about the things that they thought that AI was going to solve, which were like the really complex elements of their processes. Right. And I was like, okay, hold on. Let's take a step back. Let's talk about what your teams do day in and day out. And so then they started to talk about all the phone calls that they're answering, and all the emails that they're routing to the right place, and all of the things that they're just trying to filter out of the queue, so that the experts can focus on the queue. And so instead of focusing on solving this big, complex, challenging problem that involved a lot of data and a lot of AI advancements, we instead focused on those other problems that the team was facing, to say, hey, if we can free up the team's time from doing some of these more tedious, menial tasks, repetitive tasks, right? Then they can focus on that challenge that requires human plus machine. And we can outsource more of this easy stuff to the machine, right? Now, what typically happens in that environment is we still use AI to solve that gnarly challenge, but it's man plus machine solving that gnarly challenge together, right? We free up the time for the humans to focus on that problem by solving some of these other things through automation, or 80% of the process gets automated, 20% still needs human touch, right? That then allows you to focus on the actual gnarly challenges. So that's one thing that I've seen like apply really effectively. And it starts by saying, let's take a step back. Let's understand the people that are involved in the problem area that I want to go solve. And let's understand the process that they follow. And then let's start to look at that and say, well, what of these things could the technology do? Then you start doing proofs of concept around solving those problems, right? You still do proofs of concept on solving the gnarly problems too. And some of the things that we think are going to be hard or easy, some of the things we think are going to be easy or hard. But you open yourself up to that process, right? And now you're starting to explore what that new frontier looks like. Because fundamentally, the technology can now do different things. By the way, this is something that we've been experiencing as a species for over 100 years, right? So, Tiffany, I love talking about the Industrial Revolution, and electrification, and then, all of the manufacturing improvements that we've received, and then all of the distribution and transportation improvement. Like, if you think about all of the different technological advances that we've seen over the past 150 years, just roll through our economy, right? It's kind of mind-boggling. And then you think about all the things that AI can do, and you're like, okay, so this is another game-changing technology. How do we adapt to it, right? Like, that's got to be the mindset.
And the adaptation is, I think, critical because, to your point, the Industrial Revolution, there are tasks that were managed now by machines. There are, my dishwasher, love my dishwasher, right? And so, that is a great thing, but it then says, okay, well, what am I going to do with my time? To your point, Jay, and leaders need to communicate, okay, great, you're going to save time. You're no longer going to have a job, putting rivets in some sort of widget. So no, that's not your job anymore. And then people are going to say, okay, what is my job? And so, how are AI and humans working together?
Yeah, I think from a larger scale concept, Tiffany, what happens is that there's this age-old philosophy that there's a significant difference between management and leadership, right? You manage tasks and you lead people. And so because of this, I think of the management of tasks is going to be where obviously AI, especially Gen AI, generative AI, really is supposed to be coming in as the management of task. That's where, why we build we build cars faster now. We build because once again, we manually don't have to do as much in the management of the task. So for leadership, where this comes into is a lot more coaching. It's a lot more development. It's a lot more skill building, a lot more creativity. That's where that's going to go a lot more into that space. I think the other thing that we really have to hit home on that's a really important thing is that one of the pieces that's going to happen is that people are going to continue to move up. And as people move up into leadership, the question is no longer going to solely be, well, are you a good working manager? I think a lot of people, it's always about being a working manager, meaning like you're hopping into the trenches with your team all the time, or you're hopping into this because there's so many tasks to complete. I think that is going to see that's going to see a subsidy where it's going to go away. And then what's going to happen is that are leaders able to start moving from, say, for instance, hopping into the trenches and being the overseer to really being the transformational leader, which is the visionary? Are they able to start looking in new direction and driving new direction for where the future of their department goes? So I see roles shifting, to where people might have been in one particular role in the past, like a supply chain, that maybe now supply chain looks different in what that role looks like or what that function looks like. But as the leader comes into play, that leadership is never going to go away. It's just, can you shift more from being the overseer? And I don't like to use the term micromanager, but really more of the overseer to actually somebody that's being the visionary in the way you can drive things forward. So I think humans are going to still always have some sort of component of leadership that needs to come into play. So sharpening those power skills are going to be really key.
And Jay, I think that, in that example, right, like even the more junior people that are doing the work now, like they're going to be moving up. And so they're going to become that working manager, except instead that manager managing people, now that junior resource, that junior person is managing the AIs.
Yes.
And the ways in which we manage, the ways in which we confirm, those are all going to be slightly different because it's a technology and not a person. But like
Instead of
in
being
terms
able
of
to
that,
use the Excel, Adar, instead of being able to say, well, I know how to use Excel, it's do you know how to manage the AI to be able to work Excel much faster and a larger scale?
that's right.
Yeah.
And then that frees up time for you to do exactly the type of strategic thinking that Dominic is talking about, right?
Yeah.
So you get to think bigger about that Excel formula or that Excel model that you were building, right? If you're in finance and you're building a DCF, right? You get to think more about the risk factors and you get to think more about what percent to put into each cell of that spreadsheet because you're not as concerned about the mechanics of like the revenue flowing down to the bottom line in the same way.
Agreed. Yeah, it allows you to show, and I like what Dominic is saying about us showcasing the additional skills like critical thinking, like making, faster decisions under pressure, like being able to do those things is going to be really important.
Yeah.
Well, and additionally, I think that what we're seeing in senior leaders is there's a skill set that they need to understand not only how to be a great leader from the heart, but there's technical skills that CMOs and CEOs do not know about cloud and data and AI. And so there's probably a little bit of fear from senior leaders who aren't as familiar with these tools to just level set and get a very, sort of general overview of intro to cloud, intro to AI, all the questions you're too afraid to ask, we promise we can answer. And this is new to everyone. So level setting there too. So in the next 9 minutes, want to just get both of your just sort of final thoughts on, how can everyone in this chat move AI forward? What advice would you give for them to advocate for AI and adoption in their organizations?
Jay, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think in my case, one of the biggest things I'd stress as a final point is if you are going to implement, make sure it ties to a vision and a strategy that your company is trying to achieve. I think don't just use the tool, really focus on how that tool can end up creating better ROI and keeping that at the forefront of your mind. I think to me, that's going to be such an important piece because that's going to be the skill that I think over the next 5 to 10 years that a lot of upper leadership is going to be looking for is how well you innovate because the AI is doing the generation. So to me, knowing things like where your company's aligned and knowing, what vision and strategies coming into play, and the earlier you can learn those things, the more of an advantage you're going to have going into the next 5 to 10 years.
For me, it's kind of the counterpoint to that, which is don't wait too long to get started, right? Like if you haven't played around with ChatGPT, go do it right now, the free version. Like no reason not to. Don't use company data, right? Like go do something in your personal life maybe, but like go get comfortable with the technology, right? That's then going to feed you the sense of what the technology can do, right? And then think about it in the context that Jay's talking about to really understand now, okay, how can I become a better professional with it, right? Like I'm an engineer, I've always been a tinkerer. And so for me, it's like, oh, like I tinker on play problems over here and it helps me learn how the technology works, right? And then I bring that insight of just like how the technology works to my day job. And that then helps me build better solutions, right? So like I think that in this new AI era, everyone is that tinkerer, right? And you want to explore what that frontier is so that you're familiar with what the possibilities are. And then you can look at your day job and be like, I don't like forwarding 100 emails a day. Maybe I can build an AI that could forward 100 emails a day for me. Direct quote from a client, right? Like,
And that's, you just literally, I asked you earlier to explain it like a kindergartner, and that is it. Like, I don't like doing this. What can I do to fix that? And that is the AI like use case, right? Like this is the use case. I don't want to forward emails. How do I get AI to forward emails? And it can be that simple. It can be that simple of how do I get AI to do that? And then once AI is doing that, what am I going to use my time on to, either become a better leader, become a better performer, help the company. Great. Well, I'm opening it up for questions. We've got a couple, but just want to make sure that if you have any questions, we got the final 5 minutes to get those in. What are the most common missteps that organizations when they're starting to implement? And I think we've talked a lot about that, but I mean, if there's like one thing that you should not do or you see all the time that sort of is a red flag, what would that be?
Don't lose your voice. Don't just let AI be your answer. Let AI generate the answer to make things efficient, but make sure that you have your voice coming out. I think that's so critical in our space, is that authenticity of voice. And so go the extra step.
And then for me, I think that like, you know, that the horrors of that client who turned on Copilot without managing their data access, like, don't be that guy, right?
Yeah.
Like, make sure that you, before you turn on the AI to read everything, make sure you want all your people to know all the things that it just read, right? Like secure things first.
Great. Awesome. Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap. We'll give everyone a couple minutes to finish their lunches or go grab something. Thank you so much, Adar. Thank you so much, Dr. J. As I mentioned, be on the lookout in your inbox. We'll be sending you the video recording, and we might throw a couple of additional resources your way, the 3 pillars we talked about. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.